This is serious and we cannot take chances. It is life-threatening. This is not a storm you can sit and wait through.
The storm is going to be pretty bad, so we want to get out while the going is good.
We should have come to the shelters a day or two ago, or we should have gone to Chicago on Monday, one or the other. So we tried South Fort Myers High, but it's filled.
We are in Maine, near Maine VVI government building, and there is no one. It seems like there has been an invasion.
I hope America and upcoming islands are bracing. I hope those on the shoreline are bracing themselves. Do not play with her. Do not underestimate this storm, by no means necessary.
They literally have a house. They had a house right there. It's gone.
My fencing is down, guys. Look at my coconut trees. Somebody washing machine.
It's an absolute devastation, and this is no hyperbole. About 95% of the properties would have suffered some level of damage.
The eye of the storm came just in time. Persons were literally tying themselves to their roofs.
I'd like to introduce the Deputy Governor. This is Ginny Ferguson.
Thank you, Duncan.
As Hurricane Irma approached the Caribbean islands, it was clear this was going to be a major catastrophe, and it was going to affect thousands of British nationals in the overseas territories. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office went into crisis mode and opened its crisis centre in Whitehall. On the 7th of September, the Defence Secretary chaired a high-level COBRA meeting. That stands for Cabinet Office Briefing Room, a ministerial meeting. And the Governor and I dialed in from Bermuda. The Royal Fleet Auxiliary Mounts Bay was in Anguilla doing an initial damage assessment, but there was no communications from the affected overseas territories, the British Virgin Islands and the Turks and Caicos Islands. The Meteorological Office briefed on approaching Hurricane Jose, which was due to hit in the next 36 hours. There was a request for the Royal Bermuda Regiment to deploy, but we needed to assess when, where, in what capacity, how would it be funded, how to get there, and crucially, what was the likely impact of Irma and Jose on Bermuda. I then briefed the Minister and the Royal Bermuda Regiment on what I knew, and I asked them to prepare, and Corrie will talk more about that in a moment. The following morning, on the 8th of September, while the Governor was busy delivering the phone speech opening Parliament, I joined another COBRA meeting, which was chaired by Prime Minister Theresa May. The Governor of the British Virgin Islands dialed in. He was on board the Mounts Bay. He told us that the British Virgin Islands had been very badly hit. Buildings were totally destroyed. There was no food, no water, no power, no shelter. There was a complete breakdown in law and order. Prisoners had escaped from the prison and they were on the loose. A state of emergency had been declared. They needed help urgently. The United Kingdom, the Cayman Islands, and the Bermuda Police Service agreed to send police officers to restore law and order. Could the regiment deploy in support of the police service? The Turks and Caicos Islands reported significant damage and power outages, particularly on Grand Cayman. Assistance was required there too. Again, I briefed the Royal Bermuda Regiment that we would be required, but it was not yet known where or in what capacity. The main challenge was transport. On Saturday, a small window of opportunity arose for a Cayman Airways charter to take Cayman officers to the BVI, picking up Bermuda police officers en route. Could we be ready to go? The BPS scrambled and they were ready. The regiment confirmed they could send a small recce team. We were all stood by. But at the last minute, the Cayman Airways had to fly direct to get the Cayman officers to the BVI before José closed the runway again. So we had to stand easy and bide our time. I spent most of the weekend trying to source charter aircraft to the Caribbean. On Sunday, the Foreign Office Crisis Centre confirmed they would fund a Royal Bermuda Regiment deployment. They were likely to be needed in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and they were likely to be needed in a disaster relief role. The Ministry of Defence were tasked to do the airlift. I received an email which was so full of acronyms it might as well have been written in Greek. I knew then it was time to pass this to Major Smalley, as indeed it is now. Over to you.
It's the morning of Friday, the 8th of September 2017, and Hurricane Irma makes landfall on the Turks and Caicos Islands after carving a path of devastation through the Caribbean. In response, nearly 300 UK military personnel equipped with aid supplies leave the UK to provide immediate humanitarian aid and disaster relief to the affected region. The military response is named Operation RUMAN, which had the overarching aim of helping the people of the UK overseas territories affected by Hurricane Irma. Departing from the Royal Air Force Base in Oxfordshire, a C-17, Voyager and A400M aircraft carry over 200 Royal Marines, as well as Royal Engineers and specialist personnel from all three services, including medical supplies and aid, emergency shelter kits, rations and clean water. Amongst those deployed were 40 Commando Royal Marines and 3 Commando Brigade. The aircraft landed in Barbados, which was the home of the UK Joint Task Force headquarters and hub for the distribution of aid. The C-17 aircraft continued on with 85 personnel onto the US Virgin Islands, which was the only island with a usable runway in the region. It's now early afternoon of the same day, and I received a call from the Deputy Governor who wanted to ascertain the feasibility of deploying a contingent from the Royal Bermuda Regiment in order to augment Operation RUMAN. Whilst this was a simple request, there were a few factors at bay. The first, and probably the most important from my perspective, was the growing interest from politicians, senior UK military, and the world's press. In short, if I signed the Royal Bermuda Regiment up to supporting this operation, then I had to make sure that we could deliver. Secondly, the support of Bermudian employers was also going to play a key part in the readiness and deployability of a Royal Bermuda Regiment contingent. It is worth noting that 92% of the regiment are part-time soldiers, and prior to Operation RUMAN, the Royal Bermuda Regiment had been fixed by America's Cup 35 and the all-consuming support therein. In short, Employer support was a key component to the success of the Royal Bermuda Regiment during America's Cup 35, as it was going to be for Operation RUMAN. The third factor worthy of mention was my lack of inherent knowledge of the Royal Bermuda Regiment and her capabilities. My contract had started only 30 days hence, and I therefore needed a right-hand man who knew the organisation better than I, more of which later. It was also key to understand how many volunteers the regiment could muster in preparation for a deployment. To that end, the Chief Clerk cascaded a message to the entire regiment asking for potential volunteers to support a probable deployment, noting that employers must be aware and in support. You may be interested to know that 24 hours after the request was sent, we had a pool of 70 plus volunteers to choose from. Lastly, the commanding officer was in the UK taking some well-earned vacation. Timely, I thought. On Saturday the 9th of September 2017, another C-17 aircraft left from the Royal Air Force Base Brize Norton, carrying a Puma helicopter, and in addition to the arrival of the aircraft, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary ship Mounts Bay also reached the British Virgin Islands, with a Wildcat helicopter embarked conducting reconnaissance flights and a helicopter to help deliver supplies and aid. In addition to the support offered by the Royal Fleet Auxiliary ships Mounts Bay in the Caribbean, HMS Ocean was also diverted from her tasking in the Mediterranean to the Caribbean, yet not before embarking equipment and aid at Gibraltar on passage to the Caribbean. At 11:30 on Sunday the 10th of September 2017, I receive a call from the second in command, Major Warren Furbert, who explains that political level discussions had moved on a stage and the Royal Bermuda Regiment were highly likely to deploy a contingent to the Caribbean. We quickly meet in order to discuss the finer detail of a potential deployment. It was at this stage that I needed a right-hand man in order to assist with the planning, training and logistics. Company Sergeant Major Pete Ram was called in and was integral to my understanding what the Royal Bermuda Regiment was capable of. Factors such as how long should the initial deployment last? Were the soldiers able to sustain themselves for that period of time? What was the construct of the Royal Bermuda Regiment contingent going to look like? Was it going to consist of 10 soldiers or 100? Should it contain generalist soldiers or more specialist? And were the soldiers medically and dentally fit to deploy? Having considered all these questions and more, I made it clear that the Royal Bermuda Regiment must not burden the Caribbean island that we were going to assist. Therefore, we had to deploy a healthy force, which was self-sustaining for a period of up to 14 days. That meant deploying with enough food and water, vehicles, generators, tents, fuel, lighting equipment, to name but a few key items. With Operation RUMAN now in full swing, and each headquarters operating a 24-hour cycle of activity, I awoke on Monday the 11th of September 2017 to a barrage of emails from the UK Ministry of Defence, the UK Permanent Joint Headquarters, the UK Joint Task Force in Barbados, British Defence Section in Washington, Defence Logistics Organisation, and finally, Headquarters Air Mobility Force at RAF Brize Norton. It was safe to say that their appetite for information was insatiable. After a full day of planning and conference calls, the Royal Bermuda Regiment received a formal tasking order from the UK Ministry of Defence. A contingent of 2 officers and 28 soldiers from the regiment were placed on 24 hours notice to move. This included all personal equipment and integral logistic support. In collaboration with the commanding officer, it was decided that a major would lead the operation, with a mixture of generalist and specialist soldiers to boot. Sergeant Major Ram and I had by now reached the conclusion that the Royal Bermuda Regiment contingent would be organised into 3 immediate response teams, each with 8 soldiers. In addition, we would deploy with a logistic expert, 2 medics and a communications specialist. We now had to choose from the list of volunteers the most suitably qualified soldiers for each role in particular. In sum, mediocre was not going to cut it. Only the very best soldiers were selected. There is one area of planning that is usually given little consideration. That is logistic support. However, the Royal Bermuda Regiment are blessed to have some smart logisticians on their staff. The work that went on in the background was nothing short of phenomenal. From the very early stages of planning, the logistics staff were expediting orders with local companies for essential supplies such as bottled water, batteries, fuel and cleaning products. Moreover, they ensured that the specialist equipment such as chainsaws and safety equipment were clean and serviceable. The logistics staff were meticulous in their preparation, laying out every item and preparing it for the flight manifest. Their resolve knew no bounds. Even when the Royal Air Force told them to reduce the amount of supplies that could be flown, or that certain items of dangerous air cargo were prohibited, they raised a wry smile, adjusted their plans in order to ensure that the deploying soldiers were well prepared. Before I hand over to Sergeant Major Ram, it is worth understanding that by the evening of Monday, the 11th of September 2017, the nominated 2 officers and 28 soldiers from the Royal Bermuda Regiment knew for sure that they were deploying in support of RUMAN. However, as with any military operation, the changing situation on the ground was dynamic, to say the least, with political views requiring diplomacy and changing priorities requiring flexibility. We therefore remained unsure of a deployment date, unsure of how we were going to get there, and unsure what Caribbean island we would be supporting. We were therefore being held at very high readiness, awaiting the call. Welcome to the world of military operations.
It was one of the most severe hurricanes ever recorded in the Caribbean, with wind speeds of more than 200 miles an hour. Hurricane Irma caused billions of dollars worth of damage, left thousands homeless and killed at least 37 people. Among the islands suffering severe damage were the British territories of Anguilla, the Turks and Caicos Islands and the British Virgin Islands. For the 30 men of the Bermuda Regiment heading to the Caribbean, one of these is their destination, though it's still unclear exactly which one, while the 6 police are expected to go to the BVI. Whatever their final location, they're eager to get underway.
I am very excited. This will be my first hurricane relief, so I'm looking forward to it.
This is definitely an exciting experience for me. This is my first time being deployed, so of course I am happy, and I'm also happy that my employers actually allowed me to go on this adventure.
Preparations have been underway for days, with the troops set to leave Bermuda on Wednesday, initially for 2 weeks. A second deployment of fresh soldiers may take place if needed. So what are they expected to face?
They can expect anything from total devastation. Everyone can recall from looking at a lot of the videos from over YouTube and what they are on Facebook and so on. It's been total devastation.
This mission might not be just a simple matter of handing out supplies to grateful recipients. There have been reports of looting in some affected islands. But the regiment says it's confident it will be safe for their troops, who will be joining the larger UK contingent helping the relief effort. Around 700 British service personnel are already taking part, after criticism that London was slow to react. The regiment's men will be attached to a British Commando Engineer Regiment, but they'll bring their own expertise to the operation.
Bermuda has experience in this area. These troops and police officers who are going have experience which they can bring together to make a difference for those who need this assistance now. So, as I say, it's going to be very much a valuable part of the overall effort.
While for the Minister of National Security, the deployment is an example of Bermudians helping out their neighbours.
This speaks to who we are as a people. If you meet the average Bermudian in the street, they are willing to help their neighbor, they're willing to help the person that needs help. This is an example of us showing that, you know what, if the world, our partners, our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean need us, that we will do everything in our power to help.
So this deployment will see the men and women of the regiment helping others struggling to rebuild their lives. They'll gain skills and experience that could be of use to Bermuda itself at some point, but hopefully not anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
So as Major Smalley alluded to, the regiment will deploy with 2 officers and 28 other ranks, forming 3 incident response teams. So as the Deployment 1 officer, how did I select the team and the 30 volunteers to deploy alongside UK forces and have the capability to deliver 2 of the most important parts of the role: force protection, guarding duties, and the new concept to the British Army, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, the HADA. First, we needed a rank structure which included the 3 incident response teams. Soldiers who could embrace the regiment core values, which are selfless commitment, courage, discipline, integrity, loyalty, and respect for others. They needed to be confident and highly motivated individuals who could adjust to different situations. Team players, soldiers who could communicate, and soldiers with qualifications such as chainsaw, medics, special constables, soldiers with construction backgrounds, plant operators, and communication operators. 34 soldiers were selected to attend the pre-deployment training, the PDT, giving the regiment a small reserve if soldiers fell short at any stage of the pre-deployment training. After reviewing our mission and possible tasks, the PDT was designed to cover all the potential scenarios and threats whilst operating on the deployment. This training consisted of weapon training, followed by a live firing assessment. The UK conducted a generic risk assessment across the Caribbean. Due to the breakdown in law and order, looting, prisons with security issues, every soldier deploying on RUMAN had to deploy with their personal weapon. I believe this is the first time that the RBR has deployed overseas carrying weapons with live ammunition. We conducted rules of engagement training. We conducted scenario-based training covering a number of possible threats to the soldiers and local civilians. We conducted first aid training, revision on basic skills, chainsaw refresher training and safety reminders for all, and obviously equipment and personal kit inspections before deploying. After reviewing the pre-deployment training, we then selected the final 30 soldiers for the deployment, and here you see them here. So let's look at the team and let me introduce some of the deployment personnel. So if you just want to stand up as I call your name out. Colour Sergeant Edwards, age 35, 17 years service from Paget, construction background, mason. He was an IRT commander and he also deployed in 2008 to Grand Turks. Corporal Iris, age 26, 8 years of service from Devonshire, and he was one of the chainsaw operators. Corporal, newly promoted corporal, Pully Rayner, aged 28, 9 years service from Warwick. He was a special constable. Lance Corporal Shower Cassidy, aged 20, 2 years service from Warwick, again, special constable. Lance Corporal Aruda, aged 29, 2 years service Pembroke, and he's got basically a roofer's background. Lance Corporal Govia, aged 23, 3 years service from Pembroke, and he was a plant operator. Private Francis, aged 19, 1 year service, and from Sandys. And Private Darrell, aged 31, 5 years service from Southampton. And there were many more, and they all did an outstanding job. The availability of military aircraft to move the regiment forward to Barbados
had introduced an element of uncertainty, mainly due to being overcommitted with aircraft deploying British troops on exercise in the US and troops on RUMAN. The original plan seen the team deploying by the Royal Air Force from Bermuda to Barbados, in mass with equipment. However, it was decided the regiment would deploy in 2 waves to the Turks and Caicos Islands. A C-130 aircraft were tasked and landed on Thursday the 14th of September in order to pick up the 30 packs and limited freight. This aircraft then departed on Friday the 15th of September to Providenciales, Turks and Caicos Island, where we would then transfer onto an in-theatre flight to Grand Turks. Additionally, on that day, the 15th of September, a Royal Air Force A400 then arrived in Bermuda to load the vehicles and the remaining freight before departing direct to Grand Turks to meet the regiment's main body on the Sunday, 16th of September. Once the RBR contingents arrived at TCI around 1600 hours local time, it was soon very clear the regiment team, due to lack of in-theatre transport, would be staying for at least 24 hours until a suitable aircraft was available. With a warm welcome from the UK forces staying at the airport, the regiment then moved to its accommodation 10 minutes from the airport. The accommodation looked like an old, worn-out gymnasium, but it was actually the newest gymnasium on the island. It was just severely damaged from Hurricane Irma. That night we received orders from the Royal Marines. With little power, no running water, we settled down for the night. Throughout the night, the regiment troops guarded the gymnasium and the World Food Programme equipment next door on the sports pitch. The following morning at 0600, bright and early, we then assisted the World Food Programme with the construction of their TCI distribution hub. This saw a joint effort from the World Food Programme, the Royal Marines, local civilians, and of course the Royal Bermuda Regiment, in constructing large marquees to hold emergency food, water, clothing, and many more important items. That early afternoon, the regiment then moved to the airport and then departed for its final destination. The flight from TCI only took 20 minutes, and then we landed into the Jags McCartney International Airport. This airport remained at a key location during the regiment's deployment, acting as a secure location to sleep, to carry out unit and personal administration. The regiment accommodated in the domestic departure terminal, again with intermittent power and no running water. The regiment soldiers needed to adapt and rise to the challenge, which they did. At the height of the deployment, the airport accommodated around 150 soldiers from the task force. The regiment was attached for the duration of the deployment to C Company, 40 Commando Regiment, the famous UK Green Berets. Initially, C Company Group consisted of 50 Royal Marines, 14 Commando Engineers, and of course 30 RBR soldiers. With our positive attitude, regiment spirit, and overall professionalism, it didn't take long to embed and get the respect of the Royal Marines. We also worked with a number of different agencies whilst not RUMAN. All these agencies had representatives in the Defence, in the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies, the DDME. This was the TCI equivalent of the EMO here in Bermuda. Throughout the deployment, communications on Grand Turks and back to Bermuda was very testing at times. Everyone from Bermuda government, Barbados and the UK wanted regular updates, which kept Major Smalley and myself busy. But obviously, This improved massively once Hurricane Maria passed and the mains power was re-established for the mobile phone companies. It then took a further 60 days to restore power across the island.
Good evening, all. My name is Lance Corporal Medeiros. I joined the Royal Bermuda Regiment in 2015, knowing what I was getting into, especially as a female who volunteers regardless, because I was previously in the cadets, now known as the junior leaders. I have just recently completed my mandatory 3 years, but have signed back on for another year, taking me into my 4th year. I went down as one of the special constables. When I first heard about the group of volunteers needed to be sent down to TCI, I was gladly willing to help out. Before I could go ahead and put my name down to volunteer, I had to get the okay from my boss, which being the lovely, big-hearted individual he is, gave me the okay, saying, what kind of person would I be to deny those people help? Which I am very grateful for him letting me go. My head chef, Papa Chef, Keith the Shields at Cambridge Beaches Resort and Spa. Turned out to be a very enriching experience. Before we left for TCI, there was a lot of preparation and planning done to ensure it went smoothly, as smooth as possible when we got to TCI. We finally reached TCI after days of anticipation and a day layover in Providenciales, where we assisted the World Food Program with constructing prefabricated shelters for later distribution of non-food items to the local population. While we were in Grand Turk, we were tasked with cleaning up loose debris that was obstructing roads and access to government buildings after Hurricane Irma. We also cleaned up at shelters as well as roadsides, where we were based out of the airport for majority of our stay, which as a woman was a very interesting experience. Being one of the 3 women that went down with the RBR, we were definitely outnumbered by the men from both the RBR and the Royal Marines. Privacy was very limited, especially as far as the sleeping quarters went. Mind you, I was quite comfortable with this, growing up with 2 older brothers and being in a unit last year where I was the only female. Thankfully, though, we had separate bathrooms. There was no running water majority of the time, and the few times it came trickling out of the tap. So 9 times out of 10, we had to get soldier baths, using our drinking water or baby wipes to get cleaned up. The next best thing to a shower faucet. Obviously, compared to a full shower, it's not the most satisfying thing, but you learn to make do and make the best of it. Our cleanup efforts started at E.L. Simons Primary School, which sustained a lot of damage. Lieutenant Emerson will talk more in detail about that. Once we finished our cleanup there, we were then divided into 3 teams, each going out to different shelters, buildings repurposed by the local government for those residents who sustained major damage to their homes or lost their homes altogether. With each team, there was a Royal Marine medic attached to help out in case of any medical emergencies. The shelters were Glinton North Primary, H.J. Robertson High School, and the TCI Community College. We were sent out to our respective shelters in preparation for Hurricane Maria a day in advance to conduct what is called a recce, which includes for this exercise, damage assessments, boarding up any exposed areas, and cleaning up any loose debris to prevent them from flying around during the hurricane to cause more damage. Here you can see some pictures of us staying at the community college. I'll explain in more detail about that in a minute. My team was stationed at the community college. We also checked out the building inside to see what rooms are usable and what rooms can be used for what. Once that was sorted and we found a room for us to live in for the duration of our stay during the hurricane, we set up our kit and equipment and went straight outside to do a bit of cleanup of the loose debris outside. There you see on the top right is our kit and equipment that we had out for ourselves for the duration of the hurricane. Once the Red Cross showed up, we helped them unload and set up the supplies they brought to give out to those who will be staying at the shelter. Throughout the hurricane, there was a moment of excitement, with the door to the roof was blown off during the hurricane, which happened right after we had just received a crash course on using a spinal board. The brave soldiers that we are, having the experience we've had with hurricanes, we immediately sprang into action. Colonel Sergeant Smith and Sergeant Ford climbed on the roof with our fellow Royal Marine to secure the door back in place. This was done by passing sandbags up to the roof for the men to place on top of the door. Thankfully, all went well, and they made it back safely. That's this one you see right here in the left picture. That's our good friend who we met, Magnus, very brave man. The one you see on the middle picture with the horse is Sergeant Ford, because when the hurricane had passed, we had went outside and saw quite a number of horses outside, which was quite a shock to us, you know. We thought we'd be a little bit curious, and they were actually quite friendly. And here you see on our bottom right is one of our fellow soldiers that went private, and our little muddy nets that we had slapped in to keep us from being attacked by mosquitoes. With the storm now past, it was time for some well-deserved R&R at a nearby hotel. 6 of us went at a time and rotated every day right up until the last day before we left. During this time, mind you, all of us were very much appreciative to have had this done for us. Most of us took at least 2 showers within a 24-hour period. Unfortunately, there was no hot water running, but we still loved the fact that we were able to shower with running water. Me personally, I showered 4 times, giving myself a good scrub each time. We were also able to sleep in some very comfortable beds. Imagine going from sleeping on a cot or the floor for 13 days, then being able to sleep in a bed. Heaven. I can't thank our staff in charge enough for this. It was an overall great experience. Got to work alongside and meet a lot of great people and create some new friendships from our fellow soldiers from the UK. I'd do it all over again if I got the chance. Now to bring up our Lieutenant Emerson to speak on the next points.
Good evening, Your Excellency, Deputy Governor, Colonels, ladies and gentlemen. As very nicely announced and shown just here, my name is Lieutenant Gordon Emerson, and like many young men in the Bermuda Regiment, I was conscripted at the time, the Bermuda Regiment, and like a slightly smaller percentage of those conscripts, I learned very quickly by day 2 that I was absolutely in love with the organization and the regimental way of life, and I've been here for 9 years ever since, quietly celebrating my 9-year anniversary this month. My role in the Turks and Caicos was as a junior officer, but as a senior man on the ground. I was privileged to be included as amongst the list of the men and women going on this particular operation, not only because of its unique deployment capabilities, but also because it was a great vote of confidence by those above me that I was right for the job. As a senior man who's deployed on a few hurricanes, as well as a few overseas exercises, my job was to focus on the safety and the security of the IRT teams, as well as the soldiers directly in front of me at all times. This would include natural as well as man-made obstacles and disasters. So if you can imagine in a devastated area, this could be debris on the ground, which is dangerous to travel over, downed power lines still running with current, loose wild animals. It could be roofs or walls that are ready to collapse and potentially drop whatever is loosely hanging on an unsuspecting soldier. It was my job to provide back briefs to my senior officer in charge, as well as to liaise with any civilian or government personnel on the ground who were seeking information or communication and connection with our department and group. Looking at here was the first job site and priority we were given. By day 2 of our arrival, a second wave of our equipment had arrived, as you'd seen for some previous photographs of our vehicles, and we deployed to the E.L. Simons Primary School, where, as you can see, thanks to the efforts of the 40 Commando Group, they had just managed to start compiling the damage and the debris that was in the area. We had a lot to do. Our primary taskings were to identify any potential trees or loose debris that needed to be chainsaw chopped and then taken down to the actual dump area. We were to nail down loose tin in preparation for the oncoming storm, because we did know at that point that Maria was following close behind. We were looking to secure any salvageable items, as well as outside equipment, benches, chairs, or anything that was loose, and place them inside rooms that had not yet been damaged, in order to prevent them being picked up by the following storm and either destroyed or causing further destruction in the neighborhood. We have a wonderful photograph of Lance Corporal Govia over there operating a forklift, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was your first time with that particular vehicle? No? Bless. Wonderful. We were searching around there. One of the pieces also in play was, of course, checking on my soldiers' food and water intake. It would be surprising how often accidents and miscommunication can start occurring when you find yourself getting dehydrated or hungry and you're putting in a lot of work. We've not yet mentioned conditions on the ground. It was pointed out to me by a soldier by day 4 that average temperatures are around 107 degrees outside. And we were just carrying on because that was the job in front of us. And we looked like we had stepped into a Turkish bath with all of our clothes still on, drenched over there. He's like, "Sir, it's 107. I said, "No kidding, really." That makes total sense. Well done. All right. But we kept on going. It speaks to the fortitude of our soldiers, that this number was just a number to them. And they just kept on going and put in a full day's work. That being said, the officer in command of the 40 Royal Commando, as well as basically our officer in charge, had stood down the Royal Commandos and Royal Marines from the time of 12 until 2 every single day, because the British troops were actually going down with heat illnesses and heat injuries. It is a testament once again to our Bermudian soldiers that we did not have this problem. We had a lot of experience and a lot of heart, and we pushed on through and kept on top of our personal admin. But we did take advantage of that downtime ourselves. We're like, really? The whole island stood down? Yeah, all right. I'll do that too. So just in the center there, you have one of the site safety plans that I put together, and would then try my very best to try and send back to my TWO and my SO. As mentioned, communications were down across the island, but it was found that WhatsApp would periodically work and get through. So if I couldn't get the radio to work, and if I couldn't get the regimental satellite phone to work, then I'd pull out my own personal device, and I would try pictures and text messages. And it was hit or miss, but it was one thing, another obstacle we had to sort of move with as we deployed and got on. It was soldiers' main taskings, of course, to find areas with heavy damage, such as the roof systems here, which would be this area on the ground where the roof had been totally removed. And unfortunately, this in particular case, this was their religious and social studies room, where they had kept the majority of their supplies, which they used to teach new generations of children about their culture and their beliefs. And it was almost all entirely destroyed by the storm. But my own particular background as being a middle and high school teacher, the soldiers started coming up to me and saying, Mr. Emerson, could we use this again, or could this be salvaged? And I was thankfully on hand to say, yes, actually I can make that work, and I think a teacher can use this, and so on and so forth. And so we were able to salvage as much as we could. My particular role was often, as I said, safety and security, and atypically that would have me with radios and maps and plans, and I'd be standing back and directing workflow, keeping all of my soldiers in my periphery and making sure that safety was always a concern. But thankfully the locals and the area was quite safe, and the locals were very kind and generous, and I was able to pitch in quite a bit and get stuck in as well. I think my soldiers would have not taken it too kindly if I was constantly sitting off with them radio and just watching them work. So I was happy to jump on in. Just on these pictures here, you'll see, of course, our chainsaw operators assessing, doing their own particular safety plans, and then getting to work right there, utilizing their helpers to move debris. One of the main taskings on this particular site, E.L. Simons, was this gazebo over here, which Hurricane Maria had actually started to break the struts, and it was leaning quite dangerously. Wasn't quite coming down though. It took 2 of our utility vehicles, as well as straps, as well as our personal efforts to start degrading the base to finally make it fall over. And then we jumped on it like so many army ants and started to take it apart in pieces and just shuttle it down to the dump area as fast as possible. So you have an example of what that might look like just there. It was a bit of a beast, and it resisted us for 2 days, but when it finally came down, we couldn't help ourselves but jump on top of it like a trophy and take a quick snap and be like, yes, nothing overcomes us. And then, of course, we have our soldiers here, piece by piece, bit by bit, taking it apart. And when all was said and done, a congratulatory photograph just at the bottom there. I'd like to move on and talk to you now about the civilian shelters, particularly my experience when it came to preparing for Hurricane Maria. I was given an IRT team and the tasking to occupy the shelter which was known as the Gilton North School, or North Primary School, which I believe is only one of 2 primary schools on the island, quite a small population and island. I was very gratified as a Bermudian who, of course, is used to a certain sense of confidence and security when hurricanes pass through this island, and I know that I've got those hurricane clips on my roof, and these walls have been around for 100 years, solid stone, never budged, rah, rah, rah. And now I'm in somebody else's backyard, and people are missing roofs, and walls are down, and here comes yet another hurricane. I was very gratified, therefore, to find that the Gilton School was about 2 years old, the paint was very fresh, the walls were very thick, and all the windows had storm shutters on them. So I was like, safe. Happy days. We were told by our liaisons with the government agency that we could be expecting a certain number of people to appear at this particular school, and they would be checked with the names against Red Cross lists, so on and so forth, and that facilities would be made available. I have to say it was a bit last minute for my tastes, but when it all started falling into place, the Red Cross and World Food Group and the civilian groups just started compiling the place with food, water, equipment, and was very quickly made ready. You can see in the background there, they started opening up classrooms, and it was our job to make those suitable for people, including helping a few elderly persons who came on through. Funny story, we had one car pull up as the storm was beginning to rise and rise and rise, and they eked down the window a little bit and said, "You guys have Wi-Fi?" "No? Okay, we'll find someone else." That's okay. I said, "What? I want to take care of you anyway. Go on then." So a quick picture, of course, us helping the World Food Program and the Red Cross, headed up by this gentleman just over there, with their food and supplies, which were set in place. As soldiers, we deployed with 72 hours worth of rations, food, batteries, equipment, work, supplies, fuel, and everything else of that nature. We kept getting constant updated reports as to the status of this particular hurricane, and we were very happy to find that it was eking itself north, and then, of course, the most focused and dangerous part of the storm would actually give the island a miss. And we would experience Category 2 to Category 3 gusts, but otherwise would be experiencing Category 2 storm. We felt particularly confident not only in this location, but because if anything was still standing in Grand Turk Island after Category 5, it was going to stand up after a Category 2. Should be all right. So we're feeling quite good. Once we got ourselves situated, then of course we occupied our time hanging out with the Royal Marine medics over there, teaching them about dominoes and a few card games. And then thankfully, Lance Corporal Outerbridge over there left a little bit of Bermudian art behind to sort of say, hey, we were here and thank you very much for having us. And he applied himself with a little bit of chalk art there. Talking a little bit about post-Maria before I hand over. We have a different shelter right over here, and we have Lance Corporal Ruda, and he's with his young friends. And I have to say, particularly proud of our soldiers for reaching out into the community and winning the hearts and minds of the locals, particularly the youth. And I have a little more to say about that later. But this was in the H.J. Robinson shelter, which is the high school in the center of the island. When we had a bit of downtime and the SO and TWO were able to communicate and liaise with us, they were not above giving a little bit of basketball lessons to some of the local youth right over there, right outside the auditorium hall. The troops on the ground made sure that they prepped the area pre-Hurricane Maria and made sure all loose debris came up, and then after deployed and got themselves out as well. When there was some downtimes, we mixed up with the locals, and they schooled us a little bit on dominoes and a few other things. You know, man. I would like to give a very strong honorable mention to these persons just over here. Mrs. Udalise Swimmer, a Jamaican national and home economics teacher at the H.J. Robinson High School. She is the one in the back, and I have a better picture in just a moment, just there, and her two assistants up front, a Mrs. Gaynell Lewis and Mrs. Monica Campbell. These three individuals, I just want to point out, one thing. Mrs. Swimmer is related to Corporal Providence of Band Company, the Royal Bermuda Regiment, and so she had a little inkling that we were coming, but once she heard that there were RBR soldiers in her high school, she left her own house with no power. She opened up the kitchen, got the gas stoves to start working, and started cooking us fresh food on the spot, unbeknownst to me or any senior soldiers on the ground. She just got to work. And by the middle of the day, we had conch fritters, peas and rice, white rice, jerk chicken, conch stew, as well as curry chicken. And if you wanted to win the hearts and minds of anybody, Napoleon was famous for saying the army marches not upon its feet, but upon its stomach. And we kick-stepped over to that kitchen, let me tell you. There was no slow march happening there. So there is herself right there. Up for sainthood. Dashboard sales are doing well in the islands, little monikers. And while I'm pointing out individuals whom we formed a fast and solid connection with, I want to point out these two individuals here, Mr. Kyrie Adams and Mr. Vaughn there, also shown up top with myself, Mr. Kyrie Adams, and Mr. Vaughn there in his regimental t-shirt, which was a gift. Mr. Vaughn Adams is a 17-year-old Haitian native on the island and someone who was working with local AIDS workers to get him assimilated into the school. He had apparently dealt with a childhood that few of us could even imagine, hardships and prejudices that would leave many of us bitter and insular. And she was reporting to the SO, and she said of him, over the past 4 days, Vaughn has never had such a positive role model in his life. Yet the soldiers of the RBR have changed him completely. I now see a different Vaughn with a smile and a regimental t-shirt. All he has is reward for his hard work, and he couldn't be happier, end quote. Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Adams showed up and then asked if they could help us with our duties of clearing debris and moving things back and forth to the dump. And we were cagey at first because we wanted to make sure that we, of course, kept our safety and concerns. We didn't want to take on anyone else's safety. We wanted to keep an eye on our kit and equipment. And then we said, well, we can't offer you any particular money. And they said, no, we don't want that. I said, well, how about some food and water? So we're happy with that. And they worked every day, and they worked all day. They were invaluable sources of information about how to get around the island where debris was piling up, neighborhoods that weren't able to assist themselves as quickly as other neighborhoods. And we were able to really focus down and start returning the whole of the island to normalcy and not just certain areas. So here's us actually outside of the, I guess we can call it the Haitian district, which were the shanty towns in the central northwestern part of Grand Turk. And of all the areas that had a reason to be concerned about Hurricane Maria, even as a Category 2, it was certainly this area right there. And the locals did not have at the time anyone coming out to sort of relieve them of the items that were too broken or too misused to be salvaged. And so we rolled up in our truck and we got stuck in and involved. And there's Mr. Vaughn down there with our grateful selves. A final picture on our final day where we had looked forward and we had informed the central government, of course, that we were looking to wrap up the final project, which was the H&J Robinson High School. We were blessed to be visited by the governor of the island, just there, who was briefed by the SO right there as to our completion and any future taskings, and then was very kind enough to stay and take a picture with us. Some very happy soldiers. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for my time. I would like to now ask Major Corey Smalley to retake position.
As soon as the all clear was given by the Deputy Governor of TCI at 1100 hours on Friday the 22nd of September 2017, Sergeant Major Ram and I went out to each of the 3 IRT locations in order to assess the damage and carry out a critical needs assessment. It was clear to see that whilst Hurricane Maria had caused additional superficial damage and localised flooding, the island had fared relatively well compared to the devastation caused by Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Irma. After speaking with each IRT commander, I was able to send a message to the Deputy Governor of Bermuda, reassuring her that we were all safe. The preceding day was spent clearing routes, assisting the local community with returning their homes, and clearing the immediate vicinity of each public shelter, some of which were still suffering post-Hurricane Irma. The sense of appreciation from the local community was overwhelming. Having one island nation helping another was a sight to behold, and a point not missed on the islanders of Grand Turk. On Saturday the 23rd of September 2017, communications were up, albeit sporadic. I did therefore manage to get a WhatsApp message back to the commanding officer, which read, "Morning, Colonel. Team RBR are in great spirits. I kept them in location last night because, believe it or not, the albeit basic rescue shelters are more comfy than the airport, which still has an unserviceable generator and therefore no running water, no electricity, and if one needs the loo, one must crap in a bag. Not good. I already have one soldier in isolation with DMV, and the last thing I need is an outbreak. I will continue to make sure the troops are well looked after within the resources available to me. Enjoy your weekend, Corey." I spent the remainder of the day carrying out a military estimate in order to define the requirement for a further deployment of Royal Bermuda Regiment soldiers, noting that the list of priorities and work from the TCI Deputy Governor was starting to stretch our capability. Simply put, the island now needed specialist engineers who could repair and replace phone lines, cell phone communications, and the generators to power the reverse osmosis plant and government buildings. I therefore reported back to our Deputy Governor that in my professional opinion, a second wave of RBR soldiers was not needed on Grand Turk. The Royal Marines and Royal Engineers had also received their reassignment orders. It was time for the Turks and Caicos Islanders to resume responsibility for the activities hitherto conducted by the Royal Bermuda Regiment and the British Army. After speaking with the Joint Force Headquarters in Barbados on Sunday the 24th of September 2017, they informed me that the aircraft would not be assigned to the Royal Bermuda Regiment redeployment until a final call was made about the second wave of RBR soldiers. This decision would be made by our Deputy Governor, yet only after the official visit to Grand Turk by the Governor and Premier of TCI. This took place on Monday the 25th of September 2017 and was my chance as the military commander to brief the Governor. Excuse me, the picture's slightly out of order. And I briefed him about what the Royal Bermuda Regiment had achieved and my assessment regarding an enduring deployment. One had to wait another 24 hours for political discussions to conclude that there was no need for another echelon of Royal Bermuda Regiment soldiers on the Turks and Caicos Islands. It is worth noting, however, that the next RUMAN of volunteers from the Royal Bermuda Regiment, which consisted of 2 officers and 28 soldiers, were already in Warwick Camp carrying out pre-deployment training, a testament to our soldiers and their willingness to volunteer. The following days were interspersed with the continuing cleanup operation guarding the airport, which had reopened to commercial aircraft, and continuing our personal administration. It was also dominated by the negotiations between me and the Joint Task Force Headquarters in Barbados regarding our flight home. The flight schedule was taut, and therefore our flight details were changing on an hourly basis right until the point in which we took off. Unfortunately, the Royal Air Force were unable to spare 2 aircraft that day. I therefore had to make the decision to leave the vast majority of our equipment and vehicles behind, along with 2 RBR soldiers to account for it. Colour Sergeant Edwards and Private Darrell finally arrived home with our equipment on the 6th of October 2017.
When Hurricane Irma swept across the Caribbean, help was urgently needed, and the Royal Bermuda Regiment was ready to lend a hand, flying 30 troops into the Turks and Caicos. ZBM spoke to some of the regiment's soldiers after they'd returned to Bermuda and asked them what sort of damage they saw when they flew out.
Sometimes you'll see a full intact house, and then 2 houses later, there's a flat house, then another house, it's no roof. Trees were down, power lines, there's a lot of damage. A lot of flooding as well.
Commanders said they got to work rapidly, forming 3 immediate response teams, 2 at schools and another at a community college. So what sort of work were the 3 groups doing?
Basically our usual job that we do here, just trying to clean up, help up, rebuild, doing the main stuff, clearing roads, you know, clearing up buildings, taking down roofs and stuff, damaged debris, taking out of debris, and trying to prep it for the next hurricane that was coming.
That second hurricane was Maria, but fortunately it did less damage than Irma. But the local population was still in dire straits, without power or running water and dependent on food aid brought in. And yet they still had a warm welcome for the troops helping them. Most of the soldiers involved were British, but as fellow islanders, the Bermudian detachment may have got some special treatment.
They enjoyed us very much. It was very nice interacting with them. You know, they seemed quite a lot like us in certain ways. So it was very nice to be around them. They enjoyed being around us. We enjoyed being around them.
And that wasn't the only reaction. Some islanders were keen to get involved in the work rebuilding the schools and college, among them one young Haitian.
He took a morning to come and meet everybody, he wanted to shake hands, and then he wanted to get involved. So we gave him some work gloves and a hard hat and a luminescent vest and said, if you want to help us out, mate, many hands make light work. Have at it. He did that for 4 days. He didn't want anything from us except food and water. That's it. We tried to put a little money together at the end and say, listen, 4 days of really busting your tail with us. We really appreciate that. Here's a little something. Nope, don't want that.
Towards the end, Lieutenant Emerson's group were even getting fed by their school's home economics teacher, much to their delight.
This young man comes running up to us, one of the local children, and he says, pull on the sleeve, so-and-so over there has some jerk chicken, barbecue chicken, white rice, or beans and rice, if you'd like some. We were over the moon. We'd had rations and vacuum-sealed packets of food for the last week and a half, so this was huge morale for us. And then for 3 days after that, she came and cooked us like conch fritters and some more rice and just some local recipes. So we found ourselves very much treated that way.
So with home-cooked food and lots of help from locals, what was the biggest problem?
A bad memory would be the mosquitoes. They were terrifying. Like, we'll get a shower out like in a bush in a bucket, and then as soon as you had to literally run back to the shelter because as soon as you got dry, they were just biting you. The mosquitoes were definitely a problem.
So, an instructive 2 weeks for our soldiers. For some, this was a return visit. They'd been to Turks and Caicos in 2008 when Category 4 Hurricane Ike devastated the islands. They know the rebuilding is just beginning, and it'll take months, if not years, to return the islands to their pre-hurricane state.
As with any organization, change is on the horizon. As a result of RUMAN, discussions have begun for the regiment to provide manning to support a full-time disaster relief rapid response unit. In the more immediate future, we are making preparations to take on a full-time Coast Guard role in 2018. This will provide jobs for 14 soldiers. Yesterday, Wednesday, the last of the soldiers who started in 2014 as conscripts were posted out of active duty and will discharge in the coming months. As an all-volunteer regiment today, we must change how we approach everything we do, from recruiting to training to managing the careers of our soldiers. Over the coming months, we will be undertaking a strategic review to lay our course for the coming 5 years. The Royal Bermuda Regiment is your regiment. The 350 men and women of the RBR endeavor to uphold our values of selfless commitment, courage, discipline, integrity, loyalty, and respect for others. We continue a 400-year tradition of service to Bermuda, supporting the civil authority with the security of Bermuda, its peoples, property, livelihood, and interests in order to maintain normality. We are Bermuda's insurance policy, playing a central role ensuring that Bermuda gets back to business as soon as possible after disasters. For generations, the RBR has played a key role in maintaining our independence and autonomy as a country. Indeed, the ability of the regiment to surge manpower has even allowed Bermuda to host an event such as the America's Cup. For much of Bermuda, the Royal Bermuda Regiment Band, cap badge, and colors are points of reference of our national identity. For those of us who serve in this uniform, our regiment, your regiment, is for most of our soldiers who are part-time, the best second job in Bermuda. We are a family, we are a community who share a purpose greater than ourselves. For generations, Bermudians have joined the ranks, served their country, and when the island's in a time of need, the regiment has risen to the occasion. Coming through this organization for many Bermudians is very much a rite of passage.
It's helped me develop a lot of useful skills towards my civilian life. It's given me a sense of order that I never had before. It's given me the ability to prioritize what's important in my job.
They have to do their basic boot camp, but after that, the door is open for them. So if they really perform, they can go places. Depending on what path or what career that they like, we try to incorporate that within the regiment.
So joining the regiment is basically an opportunity for service, personal development.
It's physically challenging. There's also a mental challenge, and it also gives you something to look forward to, something that most employers look for.
It's great on the resume. It shows that you've made the commitment.
We're balancing, with most people, their regiment career with their families, with their civilian jobs, and overall we are, as an organization, very accommodating.
The regiment is not just about yelling at people, it's about discipline, it's about a brotherhood. Even we have females now, so it's also a sisterhood. Well, a family is one.
It takes a lot of courage just to walk through that front gate, but honestly that's the hardest part, is walking through that gate. Once you come in here and you get through your 2 weeks, you start to realize that this is an extremely cohesive unit. There's a lot of family bonding that goes on in here, and you do have a lot of fun, probably a lot more fun than people make it out to be honest.
You don't know what you're looking for. Like I said, there's a lot of different elements within the regiment that will open your eyes to different things, and you may just find something that you like. I would like to say that it has exceeded the expectations that I had coming in.
I love the uniform, and I love the organization.
You can always find a place for yourself in the regiment.